Hey folks, I'm Chris and I'm your Commander Mechanic. Every once in a while, I like to take a look back at some of my recent decks on the channel and do a bit of a revamp or update to them, based on some new cards released or based on hypothetical alternate builds that were discussed in the video themselves. Upgrading or tweaking or tuning decks is a process even I participate in, because no one gets it right the first time, not even your mechanic. Keep that in mind, a deck is an ever-evolving organism, and like a pet, it needs to be fed, watered, and taken for a walk every once in a while. What? Well, I mean, you'll see what I mean. The first deck I always discuss upgrading in these videos is my Rotten Soldier, my Sweet Cheese, my Good Time Boy, Many Gyrudas. This is my signature deck that I've featured on the channel multiple times and played on streams or gameplay on other channels a whole bunch too, and is one that I am constantly updating. If you haven't seen the deck before, it uses Gyruda's Enter the Battlefield ability to flip into clones to make more Gyruda copies to get more triggers to flip into new clones. Originally, this was a Gyruda companion deck, led by Sakashima of 1,000 Faces and Miara Thorn of the Glade. This was to ensure you always had reliable access to both Gyruda and a way to ignore the legend rule with Sakashima. This original build was great, but having to pay a total of 9 mana to get Gyruda into play, 3 to put her into your hand and 6 to cast her, it was, well, much slower than I wanted. Fun, but definitely one of those I'll get there eventually decks. Additionally, if Gyruda was ever exiled by, say, a Swords to Plowshares, well, my game plan went down the toilet. I'd usually switch to making copies of other players' big creatures, or making as many copies of a Twilight Prophet as I could in order to find a way to get there. However, come Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we got a little surprise in Mirror Box. This 3-mana artifact also lets us ignore the legend rule, with the added benefit of pumping legendary creatures for each other creature that shares a name with it on the battlefield. Now, we can have a win con here besides milling. These vanilla 6/6 Demon Krakens can now be 9/9s or 12/12s or more. Combat is a viable last resort. But the downside is that Mirror Box is an odd mana value, meaning it can't fit in a Gyruda companion deck. So I had to make the call. Gyruda is now the commander in Many Gyrudas. This solves a few problems, like losing Gyruda forever or taking far too long to get your first Gyruda cast going, and lets me use select odd mana value cards too, namely Mirror Box and Mirror Gallery, giving a few new ways to ignore the legend rule. Then, in Streets of New Capenna, I was gifted with another new even mana value clone in Undercover Operative. This brings the total number of even mana value clones in the deck to 15. This means we're inching closer and closer to being able to statistically ensure hitting a clone on each Gyruda enters the battlefield effect. But it also means we can ensure we engineer a scenario where we make enough Gyrudas to mill everyone out, thanks to Panharmonicon. If each Gyruda entering the battlefield looks at 8 cards instead of 4 thanks to doubling the triggers, we're statistically ensured to always hit a clone effect, making the deck potentially deterministic. This does mean that you mill yourself too though, which is something I've been concerned about. I may look at putting a graveyard shuffler like an Eldrazi Titan into the list to prevent you from milling yourself out and not everyone else, but we'll see in a few months. Check out the full updated deck list for Many Gyrudas in the show notes below. Next up is a deck from last year I brewed with another companion. This time it's Obosh as BFFs with Florian Voldaren Scion. This deck was imagined as a group slug list and certainly did just that. It was all about passive damage that we could trigger without mana costs to ensure we were digging through most of our library with Florian's post-combat main phase trigger, essentially tutoring every turn. And I did play the deck a few times on stream. It did the thing. I was pleased with how it performed, especially burn effects like Sizzle or Acidic Soil or Heartless Hitotsugu that did damage to each opponent, because we could double that up late game with Obosh, tutoring up big bomby win cons like Grey Merchant of Asphodel to drain the table out for a win. But I was pleasantly surprised when multiple people in the comments and on Twitter recommended a different route, specifically using Dragon's Approach from Strixhaven. At a base level, it's a Sizzle, dealing 3 damage to each opponent for 3 mana at sorcery speed. With Florian, that lets us look 9 deep in our library. With Obosh out, it's 6 damage to each opponent and 18 cards deep on Florian's trigger. That is pretty good. So after I played the deck a few times, I did take it apart. It did what I wanted it to do, and I didn't think about it again for a while until recently. I got this heckin' sweet Obosh altar from Altarist Alpha Omega Altars featuring my favorite Pokemon, Nidoking, on Obosh. I needed to find a home for him, so I decided to reassemble Florian Obosh as that Dragon's Approach deck, but with a twist. I came up with the concept to get a bunch of cards in the deck altered with Pokemon on them to match Obosh, largely so I can say, I choose you when I fire off the tutor side of Dragon's Approach and put a dragon onto the battlefield. I choose you, Drakuseth Maw of Flame that looks like a Charizard X. I choose you, Obsidian Charmaw that looks like a Crobat. I choose you, Ancient Brass Dragon that looks like a Gengar. And so a new gimmick was born. I took the deck to Command Fest Montreal and had a blast with it. It popped off a few times and I'm looking forward to playing it more over the coming months. Check out the before and after deck lists in the notes below. Next up is a much more recent list featuring Neera Wild Mage out of Battle for Baldur's Gate. The deck tech I did, linked up top, received a lot of enthusiasm and great response, with several people clamoring for one thing. The cat! Give us the cat combo deck list! In that deck tech, I proposed an alternate build path using Displacer Kitten and Neera to cycle through every spell in your deck, provided you've built it creatureless save for Displacer Kitten itself. That way you know every spell you flip into with Neera's ability will be a non-creature spell. Cast a spell, trigger Neera and Displacer Kitten, blink Neera with Kitten's ability, and the new Neera triggers off the spell cast from her ability, and we repeat the cycle. From there, you can spin through everything in your library until you hit a Mind's Desire with a storm count of 100 plus, and just cast everything in your deck. But I did not include that deck list in the video. Just a fair list that didn't go infinite and excluded things like extra turn spells. But I heard the outcry for the cat loop list, and good news, it's now in the notes below. You asked for it, so don't say I never got you anything. If you end up building it, let me know how it works for you. Next up on the revisit list is my recent Zellix Sanity Flayer Turbo Mill cEDH list. Just a few weeks ago I built this high-powered list that looks to use synergy between Zellix and Altar of the Brood to put together a low-to-the-ground cEDH deck that mills people quickly. My original list was blue-green, using Deepwood Hermit as the background, leaning heavily on mana dorks and additional tokens. But in the video, I proposed an alternate option of Inspiring Leader as the background for a blue-white build that not only sought to mill opponents, but could pivot to making your 1/1 horrors into 3/3 beers and take people out the old-fashioned way. After playing the blue-green list a few times and getting some feedback from my cEDH peers, I started to think that the blue-white list was the way to go with its focus on stacks and slowing the game down, while preventing opponents from abusing the potential extra resources I was giving them via mill. With surprisingly more creatures than the blue-green list, the blue-white list immediately started shaping up. More draw options, shockingly, thanks to Esper Sentinel and the new Archivist of Ogma, as well as a myriad of ways to stop opponents popping off or messing with you via stacks pieces, like Deafening Silence, Aethersworn Canonist, and Archon of Emeria. The list actually grew pretty solid pretty fast. While it has fewer methods of recursion than green, relying mainly on Sevinne's Reclamation, it's still quick and efficient and really quite good. Check out that full list below as well, and keep an eye out for me playing it on stream in the coming weeks. That's a revisit and tune-up of just 4 lists I've been obsessed with lately. If you want to check out the over 100 decks I've brewed in just the last few months, go check out my sponsor, Moxfield. Moxfield helps sponsor this show and makes it easier than ever for me to obsessively brew new, spicy lists each and every week. Their organization tools are the best in the world, and their integrated Scryfall search makes it easier than ever to explore strange cards you may have never heard of. Be sure to visit my profile and give it a follow. Are there any recent brews from the channel you'd be interested in seeing get a revisit? Anything you've built that you'd put together? I'd love to hear how these decks treat you as the pilot, so don't be afraid to let me know in the comments. Check out these other fresh hot lists, and as always folks, good luck and have fun.